Okay, great. So, we want to start thinking about, and you can type the answers in chat, some of these questions and just setting up why we want to talk about security in the context of our organizing practices. And the main thing to remember is union organizing and labor organizing is not only legal, it's protected. And when bosses union bust, that's usually illegal. So, that said, we still have to care about security a lot. And the first thing why do we need to care about security a lot? So if people want to toss answers in and maybe, Cara, if you want to read some out from the chat on what are the dangers if you don't have security or if you have too much security, and see if anyone has any thoughts on that that they want to toss in the chat. Bosses find out. Okay, yes. I guess that's the big one.
Yeah.
Anyone have any other thoughts? Anyone ever encountered too much security and seen that have a danger or a downside? Okay, we can. Union seems confusing or hard to engage with. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it's if you try to, if no one knows, if the boss doesn't know, you still need your coworkers to know. And one last question, if someone wants to try to answer, what is the primary purpose of, in our context, organizing, not just in general, of security practices? If too much security can keep workers out of OC opaque, so it impedes democratic functioning. We have an answer. The primary purpose: keeping us safe, keep workers safe and able to organize. Uh, I would say the primary purpose is to enable us to organize. Right, that's the main thing to think about. Is everything we're doing is for the purpose of creating an organization and bringing people together and helping us accomplish that. So security is about organizing is based on trust. Absolutely. You're going to love a slide we have coming. That's the way to think about this. That we want to start with is that security isn't there for its own ends. It's there to serve a greater purpose. And that's one place a lot of people get lost. And really quickly, I'll say why we put this training together is a lot of security trainings are for people who are engaged in other sorts of organizing, street protest or various other militant things or sort of very public things, a lot of different things. But organizing has different constraints in terms of how we do it, in terms of the labor movement and different protections. And so security means something different. And security practices in this setting, for example, are going to worry a lot less about who's able to scan your phone and a lot more about certain other things because we're dealing with a different circumstance. And so there wasn't something for us. And that's why we wanted to make this. And also because a lot of the other stuff, therefore, it had a different goal rather than to be able to organize. And so we need something with the goal we want because the practices always serves the goal. All right, next slide.
Awesome. So we're going to cover a couple of core concepts just to talk through them at a high level. The main goal here is that you come away with a sense of the practical steps you can take together with your organizing committee, with workers to protect yourselves and each other. We kind of cover the core values that we kind of put together for information sharing, which we have a confidentiality, availability, and integrity. Hopefully this isn't too jargony. We'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. And then a thing to keep in mind, and a thing we'll talk through, is that organizing always involves some level of risk. Often there's a level of self-selection that happens with regards to the risk involved in organizing. So we'll talk some about that in terms of mitigation and some of the benefits of having security conversations early. And then good organizing moves at the speed of trust. Like scaling trust within your organizing body is arguably one of the most critical parts of putting together an organizing body, making sure you can talk to each other quickly and easily and safely. So yeah, those are going to be kind of our guiding themes today. And if we want to move on to the next slide, we have a little more discussion. I would love to hear some examples for what y'all think confidentiality might specifically kind of encompass or refer to in an organizing context for a security practice. And I'll make sure I'm reading the chat. Yeah, not disclosing personal information is absolutely part of confidentiality. And we should say not disclosing personal information when you don't want it to be disclosed, because being public with your coworkers is always eventually part of this process. Yeah, totally. That what you share with your coworkers isn't disclosed. You don't want that disclosed in places that it shouldn't be, like to your boss. Yeah, not collecting or documenting information that's unnecessary and puts people at risk. Yeah, like if you're going to write something down, be sure that you want that written down for posterity. And sometimes things do not need to be written down for posterity. It's not safe. Yes. Yeah, establishing consent about information sharing. If we're going to go public with a piece of documentation or a letter of support for something, we should all be on the same page about consenting to that information being shared. Cool. That's a good spread. I'd love to do the same thing for this core concept of availability. What do we think that means in the context of organizing? As applied to information sharing, of course. Yeah, yeah. The folks that need access to information have easy access to it. We want friction where it's critical and as little friction as possible where people need access to information. We can also apply availability to, I guess, some of the more mundane things, kind of beyond access. Like, I guess access is kind of the root of it all. Like, if you're going to be onboarding folks to your campaign, ideally your onboarding materials are really accessible. And ideally, the stuff that doesn't need to be quite accessible, like a spreadsheet tracking everyone's contact information, is less accessible, less available. It's going to say availability isn't have materials in different languages. That's totally fair. Yeah, that's like absolutely part of the accessibility and availability of materials. Like if you're organizing at a workplace that's multilingual, like, yeah, I would totally throw that under availability. I think it's very much adjacent to like, I don't know, I see accessibility as like very relevant to security. You could probably narrow it to availability being that like the information itself is available to the people who need it when they need it. But yeah,
One thing I'd add here is we're not just talking about information, we're talking about communication channels.
true.
And along with a lot of other reasons, you don't want to be using communication channels controlled by the bosses. Another one is they can cut off availability. And in public efforts at large companies, we've seen this where they've suddenly said, oh, you can't use this discussion board to talk about the stuff you used to talk about. So they can remove the availability of that communication medium or that chat medium or whatever. And if you don't have something else, then that can really disrupt your efforts.
Yeah. So ideally, your communication medium is worker controlled and worker secured. Cool. Well, let's go ahead and do the same exercise with integrity. But yeah, big wall charting and other types of data sharing. Yeah, organizing info isn't controlled by organizers. Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe you're sorry. Shouldn't use names. I apologize. I think maybe you're referring to like the balance between too much security and too little security with that. Like we want charting information to be accessible, but not totally blocked from or accessible, but still secured. Yeah. But anyway, integrity. What do we think about integrity in this context in terms of our information and our tools and ourselves, I guess? Yeah, absolutely. Making sure information is accurate, making sure that the information you're sharing with each other is coming from a trusted source. Like your information isn't available to be like tampered with by your boss, for example. But yeah, accuracy is like very much a component of this. Like we have data that we store and tools that we use. Can we trust those things? And what steps do we take to make sure we can trust the integrity of those things?
And along with that, again, I would add comms is especially I think with integrity. Where when we get to talking about threat actors, which we will in a little bit, you want to make sure that they can't hijack comms, so that if a message is coming from people that say they're the union, people know, oh, it's actually coming from the union and not from like some other random person that took control of their account.
Yeah, I think that's a good call out. Using tools that are in line with the values of the workers. I think, especially with AI, you could like very quickly get yourself into a space where like no one feels good about the tool we're using or no one feels good about the material that is being generated. I would say that generated material feels like it fails the integrity checkpoint here. But yeah, that's a good thing to think about. Cool. Well, in the interest of time, we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. And I'll
Yeah.
hand it back over to Gershon.
So, I mean, this is a really simple concept. We don't need to spend too much time on this. Something I want to add, I think, that's not directly on the slide, though, that's related, is when we have these conversations about security, as was said earlier, there's always going to be some risk in organizing. And part of that is to help people get an accurate assessment of that risk. And they might say that that risk is too much. And you might say, oh, then we shouldn't talk about it. No, you should. And then the person that thinks that risk is too much, this is a filtering mechanism because you're going to be asked them to be out there talking to coworkers, doing things, engaged in this work in what will eventually be a public effort and eventually to, take risks in terms of collective actions together. And so if there's people that are so worried that there's nothing you can do to make them feel things are secure enough, they're not going to be the people that are going to be good functioning OC members anyway. So their assessment of what their risk they're able to tolerate is not something you can meet, and then that's okay. So having these discussions is also about making sure people are comfortable with what will necessarily have to be the case, as much as trying to figure out where you can be safer and how to be safer as well. And what this slide is also emphasizing is that the most important security risk is always social, right? Organizing is happening with our coworkers who know what we're doing. And if you think through the campaigns that you've worked on or been a part of or had friends that are part of, and if and how the boss has sort of figured out things are going on and moved in on them, typically there's a person who they talked to who then went and told their manager. So, we worry a lot about digital security, especially just because that's how people are taught to think about safety. But at the end of the day, it's almost always going to be the case that your main risk is in the people you're talking to, what you're sharing with who. And the main way people are going to be safe or feel safe is if they know they can trust each other. And again, part of these other digital security conversations is to help people all get to that point because they come in and it can be really paralyzing because of how people talk about and think about security in other contexts. And it can also cause a lot of really irritating, lengthy conversations about do we do this, do we do that? And part of what we're doing is we're giving a model for how to think about this, and then going to be giving some tools for how to have these conversations to help get people to this point where they have a more accurate assessment of where the biggest risks come from and what the best mitigations are, so that your OC can all be on the same page. Um, and that also that the organizing practices we already adopt as the best ways to build good OCs, solid OCs, knowing one another, trusting one another, talking to one another, knowing where people are at, and not going via sort of anonymous actions or splashy posts, but by that process, they in themselves already are in line with what security practices should be. So, all right, next slide.
I'll do the first three. Let's roll with it. So we're going to talk through a lot more of this in the discussion portion, but just to go over some high level things that we think about in terms of mitigating risk. First, we have redundancy. It's always good to avoid single points of failure, whether that's people or systems or tools. Next, we have shared responsibility. Similar to redundancy, no one person should have all of the keys. Consider using a shared password manager so you don't have just like one person on your OC with that social media account password or one person on your OC with that Google Workspace password. It's very good to have a secure space to share those resources responsibly. And next, appropriate access. Share what needs to be shared and don't share what doesn't need to be shared. I think it's good to get things into writing that are important to have as a shared resource. And it's not necessarily important to have detailed notes of everyone on your OC venting for 2 hours in a shared resource. And to extend that, thinking about appropriate access with terms or within the terms of like encapsulation, modularity, and isolation. So you want things to be modular enough that you can share portions of information or portions of the broader picture of your campaign when they need to be shared without having to share everything with everyone all of the time. And then making sure you're isolating critical information that shouldn't be publicly shared under any circumstances. And I will hand it back to Gershon for the next three.
Yeah, so sort of picking up from some of what we were talking about before, some of the other stuff is really directly imported from computer security, solidarity and trust, not so much. These are the things we bring to the table as organizers. And part of that is mechanisms for establishing trust. I've been part of organizing efforts where people worry about, like, oh, should we have someone sign a confidentiality agreement? I don't think that's the right mechanism for what we're doing. It's more like, is there a vetting process for when someone is brought into a space? Is there a vetting process for when someone is brought into a more secure space, or for when someone is granted access to your organizing list or to a portion of that list if you've cut it up in some modular way so they only see it for their department? Is there check-ins and accountability with it? Do you talk about how the data should and shouldn't be used? So that's mechanisms for establishing trust. Do you see how people perform over time and then evaluate them? Again, all good practices an OC should always be doing. Evaluate how much to bring them in on based on how much they've done. Um, with democratic discussion, accountability, and then standardized security practices so that everyone is on the same page and you've sort of documented, like, if you're doing this, this is how you treat it, and so forth, just so that everyone agrees. And then, yeah, good habits and security culture, which is to say that people should should practice with each other what to talk about, what not to talk about, and sort of hold each other to account on that. Maybe get in the habit of not just even mentioning certain details in mixed conversations. Talk about what to do when and maybe even do role plays as part of this. Is also inoculation, all of this, just like the point with a filtering mechanism when you talk about security. This is inoculation. You're thinking about how the boss is going to respond and how they're going to monitor you as part of how they're going to respond to your campaign. So, what's going to happen when the manager comes around and starts asking in really invasive questions about who's been talking to who, or they heard some conversation? Have you practiced how you're going to respond, how you're going to blow them off, how are you going to say nothing? Um, these are all elements that go into security culture and practices that will help keep your campaign secure. That's it, I think. Yeah.
Awesome. So we have a call for examples here on what some common pitfalls might be. So if you have any that you want to drop in chat, definitely do, and I'll make sure to read them. But at a high level, I think maybe the most common pitfall is security paralysis, which is very relevant to the topic of arguing about which app to use for group chat. So security paralysis being doing nothing while you struggle to do everything at the same time, and very focused on like, I don't know, perfect is the enemy of good as a operating concept. Um, if you don't come to a consensus and pick something and roll with it, you're never going to come to a consensus and pick anything. The group chat you have is better than the group chat you want to migrate to most of the time. Next, we have worrying about the wrong actors. This, of course, varies from across different types of organizing, but here, let's think about state actors versus corporate actors versus malicious outside parties. If you're organizing at a workplace, you likely don't need to be concerned about high-level state actors and need to be more concerned about your boss and corporate systems of surveillance. But they're all things that should be, I don't know, materially considered in an early discussion with your organizing committee. And then again, kind of echoing what Gershom said earlier, most attacks are social. Like most of the time, it's not going to be some advanced technical attack that was carried out against an account of yours. It's going to be someone talking to their manager about something that they discussed with an organizer. Back to you, Gershom.
Um, Something else related, although actually I want to add on to that, something else I've encountered recently is people, in terms of worrying about the wrong actors, who over-index also on legal threats. Or like, so I've heard people say, well, what if this group chat gets subpoenaed into discovery? And I was like, okay, is that really the thing that you're worried about right now? It's not a non-concern, but right, you need to sort of sort out what's what in your model. Um, but also protecting the wrong thing. So, right, people over-index on everything needs to be secure, and they don't think about, well, different things need different security. So, for example, documentation on like, the very basics, like we're just, we're organizing and this is what we're doing. That probably shouldn't be that secure. Because, obviously as you're growing, you're going to be showing that to every new person that comes in. So you don't have to worry about keeping that under lock and key, maybe the same way you do, again, your list of contact names and assessments. And um, what you really want to do is decide concretely what things need what level of security, rather than just treating is it secure or not as a binary choice, where more secure is always better. And then also technological solutionism. Again, this comes back to the what chat app do we use? But there's so many other things too, where it's like, well, if we use this, I don't remember, like this pad application, it's got like better security, and let me tell you about this cool algorithm, so it like does it in JavaScript. It never said, oh, okay, great. Is the threat actor you're worried about going to be stymied by that particular algorithm? Is that the thing standing between them and your notes on your minutes? That's another example where people try to come, yeah. come up with technological answers to social problems, which I'm sure we've all experienced in different ways. And I won't go into some of the even goofier ones, but proposals that try to dodge the hard work, often of taking that risk of talking to your coworker with your full name and face about what you really think. And there's just no way around that one. So, all right. I think before we're about at the end of the recorded portion, but before we do that, we do want to, I think, jump the stack of what we planned here, just to say that we're going to be presenting after the discussion a threat model worksheet that will help people talk through a lot of this. And it's something that you can use as an exercise in your organizing committee, or an organizing committee you're helping to advise. And it's going to have, you know, thinking through systematically, what are the things you're protecting? What are your assets? Who are your adversaries? Who are the threat actors? Is it the nation state? Is it your boss? Is it the press? A lot of possibilities. What are their mechanisms that each of them has at their disposal? What's the severity of any particular attack? How worried are you if one thing leaks versus another leaking? And then finally, matching up the mitigations that we've sort of talked about in others into how you can harden up against each of these things. And I found going through that exercise with a campaign is a very good way to make people think about things they haven't thought about, feel better about things, and you know, improve some aspects, and also get more comfortable with the aspects that can't be improved, because at least they'll understand what the trade-offs are. So if you've got some real conflicts going on and some real heat and tension, it can be a good way to diffuse that and get everyone working together. So I'm really looking forward to running through that with all of you.